Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, where I get a chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. This broadcast is sponsored by Reveal-Brainspace, the industry's leading AI eDiscovery platform. Don't forget to subscribe to watch me, George Socha, weekly with leaders in eDiscovery. Thank you for tuning in.
Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. I am George Socha, Senior Vice President of Brand Awareness at Reveal. Each Friday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern, I host an episode of eDiscovery Leaders Live where I get the chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. Past episodes are available on the Reveal website. Go to revealdata.com, select resources, then select eDiscovery Leaders Live. My guest this week is Tiana Van Dyke. She is Senior Director Client Services at Epiq in Calgary, Canada. She also at Epiq is the Global Chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Governing Committee. Prior to joining Epiq, Tiana spent nearly 13 years at the law firm of Burnett, Duckworth & Palmer as the manager of eDiscovery and litigation support, and before that, she was an imaging coordinator at Bennett Jones. In addition to her day job at Epiq, Tiana also is a law school guest lecturer and active in ACEDS, EDRM, and Sedona. Tiana brings, as I know from personal experience, a consultative mindset to the job with a focus on outcome and strategy. Tiana, welcome.
Thank you very much, George.
Let's start with your background. What is it that took you from wherever you started to where you are today?
Well, I think the same way most people end up in eDiscovery, not in eDiscovery. So I did my undergraduate degree in kinesiology. Intentions, going to medical school, landed myself a summer job at a law firm and ended up in a position where lit support opened up. And from there, some very strange, interest in the eDiscovery field kind of took over, found myself moving law firms and really expanding that role. And it went from there. I mean, I think that's how everyone gets to eDiscovery, is by starting in a very opposite direction.
It must be that by now there are people, I know by now there are people who are coming out of school and going directly into this eDiscovery. That wasn't the way at all. So when you landed at that first law firm, that wasn't an eDiscovery role at all, right?
No, I was the student recruitment coordinator for the articling student program. And I ended up kind of just being a floater resource assistant. Somebody went away to Canadian Idol for an extended period of time, and this vacancy opened up in lit support. And that was my first exposure to an affidavit of records. I, embarrassingly didn't even know what that was prior to landing in lit support. But from there, I had always kind of been interested in technology. And one day they brought me a laptop and they said, the summation mobile license won't check out. And I'm like, oh, I can just fix that. Now, I didn't even know what summation was. And so I tinkered a little bit. And then they said, we could really use somebody who could do summation. And summation and law pre-discovery is kind of where I started.
Mm-hmm. And from that firm, you then went to Burnett, which is where I met you.
Yeah. So I was at Bennett Jones, and I really kind of felt a passion for this eDiscovery thing. I had figured out that law pre-discovery could take PST files and extract it, and this is the direction that I wanted to go. And so I found an opportunity through a recruiter to meet some of the partners at BDP, and we had a really great conversation. And, I talked about what I thought we could do with this, and it was still pretty new. eDiscovery was happening. It was, it was here, but it was still new enough that people used alternate methods a lot of the time. So I said, I think this is what I can do. And they said, we're going to take a chance. And, we almost 13 years later, a very well-developed e-discovery program and, kind of software structure. And the firm was really successful with their e-discovery endeavors.
But you're not there anymore. You're at Epiq now.
Yes, the dark side. At least that's what people from law firms say. So
we're all the dark side one way or another.
Yeah, we had that conversation yesterday. I think it depends where you start. But I really found kind of the business of e-discovery to be interesting to me. The strategic advancements, the delivery of services. And, just like my finding e-discovery at the start of my career, I think I found this opportunity. Epiq was expanding into Western Canada. I felt a really strong kind of ownership of this opportunity to build the market, expand the market, offer more services, because there's, Western Canada has a limited number of vendors, I think, really in the e-discovery space that are common. And so this seemed like a really neat opportunity to take the part of running a lit support department that I felt really passionate about, the business of the lit support and e-discovery, and take it to the operational side. So made the jump, a little bit paranoid, a little bit nervous, but it turned out to be an incredibly good move, because the growth, because of the impact that Epiq has, and because of the global footprint, I've been able to access a ton more people and resources, and really just participate in some really broad scale e-discovery projects and thought leadership.
I imagine that, as is the case with so many of us in e-discovery, you don't have a standard day. Monday does not look like Tuesday, does not look like Wednesday, but give us a sense of what your days can look like in your current role.
Yeah, so the only thing that is consistent is the coffee. The coffee is fairly consistent. From the coffee, it can be something from jumping on a committee meeting to a board meeting to presenting a webinar to moderating a webinar, handling client concerns, jumping on for strategy calls. My day can have 15 back-to-back meetings, or it can be open and creative. Those ones are less regular, though. The meeting ones are much more common. But I think the most fun part is the leadership opportunities inside of the team. So when I can find opportunities to do that through, programs that we can run at Epiq, I really like to try to find time to do that and make that a regular part of my workday. And coffee, just to be clear.
Coffee, I gather, plays a major role in your workday.
It does. Being on the West Coast and operating on a New York schedule, my days are early, more often than not. So I think that's been I guess it's a crutch.
I bet that doesn't translate into the days end early, does it?
Not usually, no.
Of course not. One of the areas I'm sure you're involved in is the development of workflow strategies, and specifically customized workflow strategies. That's got to be part of what you do, right?
Yeah, it absolutely is. I mean, oftentimes I'm not in the weeds anymore on projects, but oftentimes people come to me with a problem. Clients will come to me with a problem. And the strategy development around coming up with something that is going to work for them, work for their client, that is best for both of us, not just best for Epiq or not just best for the client, I think is something that I really, really love. Like, throw a problem my way. I'm happy to try to find a solution. I was having a conversation with a colleague yesterday about how the trust that you build early on in a relationship, the give and take that has to happen in your communication, that level of consulting where you truly build a partnership ends up helping you down the road, because that trust really perpetuates the cycle of partnership. So, and collaboration. And I think, like, that, to me, developing that by being upfront and open and consultative at the beginning in the relationship that you build makes everything else that you do easier. The transparency is so important. All of that stuff comes into play, and, trying to help develop that and trying to help encourage our team and make that part of our standard is something I feel very passionate about.
Why don't you share some examples, some concrete examples of what you mean by openness and transparency?
I can use an example from yesterday. So we had one of our project managers mention that a client had asked for something outside of what we would typically do related to a reporting and analysis of file types. So this was something, it wasn't something complicated, but it was something that, typically wouldn't have been part of the workflow because it involved a lot of, research and recommendations. And in putting that together and in meeting that client where that client needed us to be, that project manager was able to build this relationship with the client. A few days later, that project manager saw an opportunity to give something to the client that they hadn't asked for. And she reached out to the client and said, hey, I think that I can go down this little rabbit hole here, but I think it's going to benefit you. Are you okay if I do that for 2 or 3 hours? Because of the relationship she had built, the client said, absolutely. I know that what you're going to give me has value. So that's an example literally from just a few days ago, but had an impact on that client. And I think that relationship between that project manager and that client is changed now because they have built this mutual kind of respect and trust.
Earlier this week, I was at the Masters Conference in Chicago. At a reception following that, I think, or at one of the breaks during the conference, someone from a much smaller service provider was discussing the differences that he saw between small and large service providers. Mm-hmm. And one of his assertions was the large service providers, precisely because they are so large, can no longer be nimble and can no longer essentially craft custom solutions for individual clients. Instead, they have to roll out cookie cutter solutions so that every client gets forced into the same solution. Yeah. From what I'm hearing from you, that's not your job at all, and that's not the world you're living in at all, is it?
No, it's not, but I do understand. And I think it's easy to fall into that structure. The bigger that a company is, and I learned this coming from a small place to a company with 7,000 employees, is that you need so much process and so many guardrails in place because of the number of people who are doing transactional work, because of the number of people who are doing different pieces, and in a certain sense, you end up with specialists in these little categories. And what happens when that happens is it becomes difficult to have knowledge transfer. You end up with something that feels process driven. But I'm not saying that doesn't happen. It certainly happens. And there's clients who prefer that. Mm-hmm. But what we are working really hard to do now is identify clients who aren't looking for that. There are two kinds of solutions in the e-discovery space. There's the commoditized version, and then there's the custom version. And a lot of people are happy with the commodity version of e-discovery because it meets 90% of their needs. But there's going to be clients who feel like they want more. They want to rely on the experts for expertise, not just for work to be completed. And what we're trying to do at Epiq is create a scenario where we are able to meet you in your court, meet you in a position where we can learn what you need, understand what you need, and then deliver on it with a lot less, not instruction, we still need instruction, but with an understanding that we're both operating in the same direction. So I think that really differs from, what you're talking about, in the sense that we don't just want to take orders. We need to take orders, but we don't want to only take orders. We want to be able to offer you something that is bigger and better and benefits you. And that return on value that we can deliver is something that I think a lot of clients are interested in. And it's a pivot that the e-discovery world seems to be making. E-discovery used to be so expensive. And then we swung it the other way. We made it a commodity, and then it got cheap. But in that process, something was lost about the uniqueness of e-discovery, and we're working really hard to bring that back.
So with this more dynamic consultative approach, you end up with a variety of workflows. Can you give, without of course disclosing things you shouldn't be disclosing,
Of course.
give some examples or sanitized examples of what those workflows can look like?
Yeah, so, okay, let's start with something about processing. In a lot of cases, when stuff gets processed, you end up with this black bucket of things that didn't work out quite the same. Now, there are ways that you can just throw that report back to a client and tell them to deal with it. But there are ways that you could spend 2 hours and organize the information in a way that you can rank the importance of addressing those documents that didn't process to a client. You can either tell them there were problems and we don't need you to look at it, or we can tell you, here's a report, look at it. But what you could do instead to provide something elevated is take the mass of information and turn it into something digestible that a client can understand the risk, because clients tend to make most of their decisions based on the risk of a decision or another. So by taking that black bucket of stuff that got not put through processing, that failed, that errored, that had passwords, and breaking it down into high priority things the client needs to deal with, and maybe you provide them with the file paths for those so they can go back to the end client and say, are these folders important? Because if they are, these documents got missed. You have that middle bucket of things that typically we see spreadsheets tend to be important. There's 500 spreadsheets that didn't process. Here are the file names. We think the file names tell us that, and then we can make an interpretation. And then there's stuff like att001.txt, right? We're probably not going to need that. So by categorizing it, we're providing like this understanding. Clients don't come to us because they know how to do e-discovery. Maybe they do, but they come to us because we know e-discovery and we've seen a whole bunch more things than they've seen. So I don't know. Does that example kind of give you some perspective?
Yes, it does. Let's change gears now, though, and look at what you all are doing with AI models, portable AI models.
Yeah, so I mean, portable AI models is something that I can't wait to see utilized more often. In the context of a doc review or an industry, I worked a lot in energy before at the old firm because we're based in Calgary. So with the portable models, what you're able to do is take learnings from work that you did, work you paid hourly for, work that lawyers, attorneys put their eyes on, and you can actually take the learnings from those, put them in a library, and apply those to future cases. So let's use Cal as an example. We complete a Cal project on an oil and gas file. The way that the model learned from our language patterns that we said, yes, we care about, no, we don't care about those. There's a lot of similarities between other oil and gas files because the contract language is the same. It's similar. There's a lot of, synergies between the data that is going to occur in one file versus another, particularly with a client, let's say ABC Oil Company brings you 10 different matters. By being able to port these AI models, create a library for clients or create a repository for industries, we can actually take the learning that has been done before and get a head start on, future doc reviews or future investigations. Depending, the more similarities you can create between the document collections that you move the models between, the more accurate these are going to be, the farther ahead you end up. And so this is such an elevation over what we used to do, which was start from scratch every single time. You could have a file that shared, 80% of the same documents, and you just paid somebody to review it and do Cal, and you had great success. And now 80% of the documents are the same in the file, and you start over again from scratch. These kind of models let you take everything that was learned before and use them. And I think that is so powerful, particularly when you have investigations and you are trying to find patterns of behavior. if you think of something like an employment matter where you're looking for, inappropriate conduct, or, even trade secrets or anything like that, if you take language patterns in, I oversimplify it, call it the yes and the no bucket, coded responsive, coded not responsive. If you take what you learn from the yes bucket, and just as importantly, what you learn from the no bucket, you can further your investigation almost instantly and determine if it is worth investing more cost, more time. And I think that, as we start to use this type of review, this type of tool more, we find ourselves in a position where clients are going to get more for what they are partnering with us for on their matters.
But when you use an approach like this, how much of a jump start or head start does it provide?
Well, if you think of CAL, if you think of TAR, think like back to the old days where you had a seed set and you pre-trained the system. Without actual statistics, and of course I am making this number up, but I would say that you cut down a huge percentage, let's say 30 to 50, 60% of the training that you would need to do to stabilize, kind of to get to a model that is accurate. You can eliminate a large percentage, perhaps that big, of the work that has to be done before you can get there. Because at this point, you're taking a model that has been built and now you're just fine tuning it. So where you used to have to do bulk volumes to get results, now you just have to fine tune things that are distinct in the matter you're talking about, that are different from the matter you've done before.
And that must mean that the fine tuning can be accomplished much more quickly as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, it absolutely can. And, with tools now and being able to pinpoint investigations, within tools using a variety of different analytic tactics and techniques, that process doesn't even have to just be, off the cuff. It doesn't have to be arbitrary. Instead of saying, okay, now I'm just going to start doing review and see how the model adjusts, we can target things, we can pinpoint things and feed that into the system and get to the end result even quicker.
And then each subsequent use of a model helps further refine and improve that model?
Yes and no, because of course every subsequent matter is now a little bit different.
Right.
But it provides even more examples that help understand what you're looking for. And as long as you are aware of the limitations, I think that's important, because of course these models are not magic. They are based on decisions that you have made, right? As long as you are aware of the limitations on it, the more that you fine tune the model, if your data set is in line with the decisions you've made in past usages of the model, you're going to get better results. Where you'll find that doesn't really work as much as you were hoping is if there's a departure in the data from what has been achieved before. So it's, that's, another reason why I say how much can you save every time? It really depends, because something minute can really change perspective on what the model can accomplish. As much as you wish it was magic, it isn't that black box that makes decisions for you. It is based on statistics and probabilities from those language patterns that you've put in the yes or no bucket.
What is involved in creating a model in the first place?
In terms of ingesting the data and
what are the steps you take?
What's that?
What are the steps you take? How do you do it?
So we're going to process data. We're going to upload it into our tool of choice. We are then going to take one of a couple of routes. If we have ideas on the direction that we want the matter to go, we have ideas on what may or may not be in the yes or no bucket, we can focus on targeted searches, or we can focus on analytics like clustering to help us get to data, or we can start from scratch with a seed set to try to kickstart it. Alternatively, we can start from complete scratch and start doing, a prioritized review from scratch with the data that we have. All of these different versions and kind of iterations of the process can be applied to the model and the learning patterns that you can get out of that, and then applied forward in the future. So it really depends. I think this is where the customized, we have a team who focuses their attention on this. We have experts who do this for a living because they can look at a data set, understand what's in there, and make the best recommendations. Sometimes clustering might be the best place to start. Sometimes targeted searches on the terms Tiana and George might be the best place to start. But if you can partner with, the team that you're working with and understand what the matter is about, that tends to be the best place to kick off the process. Once you have the data in the software, where you go from there in terms of if you just start from scratch, if you use seed documents, if you use a sample set or a prevalence set, if you use other analytics, if you use searching, those different components will have different results, but they're really going to be dependent. Which one is the best is really going to depend on what your data is and what your data can accomplish. There's a big difference between a entire server collection and a targeted collection. What you're going to need to put into the data to get the results in the model are going to be very different.
What sort of adoption rates have you seen among clients to the use of portable AI models?
Clients are very happy with this, although I find it still underutilized. I would like to see it utilized more. Back in the day when TAR came and people thought of this black box, there was like this fear, right? That things were happening that they didn't know about, that they couldn't justify or explain. I wonder, and this is just, me guessing, but I wonder if a little bit of the lack of adoption has to do with this is now another complexity that we've added to this process. Because when you talk to clients about it and when you explain that, we can make you a library of options of AI models for all your cases, and then when you bring us ABC company again, we can take what we learned last time, and they're like, I love it. But, there can sometimes be a hesitancy to then adopt the process. But I'm a really big believer that we can demonstrate what the results would have been. Every now and then you'll have a client who's incredibly hesitant, who says, I just want to review doc by doc by doc by doc by doc. Applying an analytics model over top of the learning that happens in that kind of a workflow and then showing them what the results would have been is an incredibly powerful tool for building adoption. And I think that if we can use standard models and then explain what would have happened in these portable models, that's going to really lead to more adoption. I realize that's not the question you asked, but just getting there, people use it. People love it. When you talk about it in theory, people love the idea. What a way to save money. What a way to save time. But me, at least in my small little bubble, I don't see it used as much, even though there's excitement about it.
It took a long time for the legal industry to accept the idea that a lot of electronically stored information actually constituted evidence that you could use in court.
Yeah.
And then when TAR was first introduced, and then we had keywords, and those were fairly easily understood because we were used to Lexis, Nexus, and Westlaw. TAR came along, and it took a long time for people to adopt the use of that. There's still many people who are hesitant.
Yeah.
It sounds from what you're saying that you're seeing a much more rapid rate of adoption with AI models than you saw with TAR. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. I think because there was such a change, the introduction of the TAR type technologies was such a departure from what was previously happening, where you saw things and you knew that they were there and you touched them. And then TAR was this, magic box that did stuff you didn't understand. The difference between how that works and how these portable AI models work isn't as different. There is a ton of overlap. There's a ton of similarities, how those work. And I mean, in theory, you could have always done a workflow like this if you took past documents, you took their coding, you applied that to future, so I think people can see how you got from TAR or CAL to portable models. So the hesitancy seems to be substantially less because you haven't introduced anything new. You've just improved on something they're now comfortable with.
Well, wonderful. Tiana, thanks so much for joining us today. Tiana Van Dyke is Senior Director, Client Services at Epiq. I'm George Socha. This has been eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. And Tiana, thank you again.
Thanks, George.